The observation deck of Terra's 9 station was packed with representatives from 47 different species. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few glowed faintly in the dim lighting. They had all traveled from across the galaxy for one reason: to witness the unveiling of something that had never been created before. Director Vaxilon stood at the center of the chamber. His insect-like body reflected the overhead lights as his mandibles clicked nervously. He was proud of what his team had accomplished, but he was also aware of how dangerous their creation could be if misunderstood. The Galactic Survival Certification Board had spent decades developing tests to measure how well species could survive on hostile planets. These tests saved lives by preventing unprepared explorers from venturing into environments that would kill them. Honored delegates, Vaxilon began, his words translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. Today we present the Class 15 Deathworld simulation, the highest classification ever created. A massive holographic projection materialized above the crowd. Gasps and alarmed sounds filled the chamber. The image showed a world of absolute horror. Volcanoes erupted continuously, spewing lava across blackened landscapes. The oceans were not blue but a sickly green, filled with acid that could dissolve metal. The sky crackled with electromagnetic storms that would fry any unshielded equipment instantly. Enormous creatures stalked the land, their teeth as long as a person's arm. Even the plants looked deadly with thorns that dripped venom. Ambassador Krell, a large reptilian delegate with dark green scales, stood up slowly. His yellow eyes narrowed as he studied the projection. Director Vaxilon, I must ask a question. In all of recorded galactic history, no species has ever survived a Class 8 world during field testing. Most military units fail at Class 6. Why have you created something rated at Class 15? What purpose does this serve? Vaxilon had expected this question. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of enthusiasm among his people. Ambassador, that is precisely the point. This simulation is not meant to be passed. It represents the absolute theoretical limit of what any carbon-based life form could possibly endure. We have included every deadly factor we could imagine. Gravity 3 times the standard, an atmosphere that requires constant filtration, predators with pack-hunting intelligence, constant earthquakes, and vegetation that actively hunts prey. He paused, letting the information sink in before continuing. Our computer models predict that even our most elite soldiers, the best trained operatives in the galaxy, would survive perhaps 4 to 6 hours in this environment. Maybe less. This is not a test. It is a warning. It is a reminder that the universe has limits and we must respect them. The delegates murmured their agreement. Throughout galactic history, countless lives had been lost because of overconfidence. Young species eager to prove themselves would attempt to colonize worlds far beyond their capabilities. Military commanders would send troops into environments they did not understand. The result was always the same: death. A clear demonstration of impossibility could prevent such tragedies. The chamber doors suddenly hissed open with a sharp sound that made everyone turn. 4 figures walked in and they immediately stood out. They were bipedal like many species, but their proportions were different. They had no scales, no fur, no natural armor. Their skin was bare and looked fragile. They wore simple gray uniforms with a strange symbol on the chest, a blue circle with green patches and white swirls. Ah, the human delegation, Vaxilon said, trying to hide his irritation at their tardiness. Welcome. You have arrived just in time. The leader of the group, a tall male with short dark hair and calm brown eyes, nodded respectfully. Apologies, Director. Our transport had some complications. I'm Captain James Mitchell, and this is my team: Sergeant Robert Hayes, Dr. Emily Carter, and Engineer Thomas Blake. The humans moved to an empty section of seating. Vaxilon noticed that other species shifted away slightly, creating distance. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, having only been discovered 40 years ago. Many species still did not trust them or understand them. Vaxilon continued his presentation, explaining the technical details of the simulation. The humans listened quietly, their faces showing little emotion. Emily took notes on a small device. Thomas studied the holographic world carefully, his eyes tracking the movement patterns of the simulated predators. Robert sat with his arms crossed, looking almost bored. James simply watched with an expression of mild interest. When the presentation ended, Vaxilon opened the floor for questions. Several delegates asked about safety protocols and technical specifications. Then James raised his hand. Director, I have a question about the difficulty settings. The simulation runs at maximum difficulty, Vaxilon explained. Class 15 is the absolute highest rating. James nodded slowly. I understand that's your maximum. What I'm asking is, can you modify the simulation to make it harder? The chamber erupted into chaos. The noise in the chamber was deafening. Delegates shouted in their native languages, creating a cacophony of clicks, roars, whistles, and growls. Several species stood up from their seats, their bodies rigid with shock. Director Vaxilon raised his upper limbs, trying to restore order, but it took nearly a full minute before the room quieted down enough for him to speak. Captain Mitchell, Vaxilon said carefully, his translator struggling to convey his confusion, I do not think you understand. Class 15 represents the absolute maximum. There is nothing beyond this. It is theoretically impossible to survive. James remained calm, his expression unchanged. With respect, Director, we understand that it's impossible by your standards. We're simply asking if the simulation can be modified beyond its current parameters. Vaxilon's mandibles clicked in frustration. Modified how? What could you possibly want added? Robert leaned forward, speaking for the first time. His voice was rough and direct. Reduce starting equipment. Currently, subjects spawn with a survival kit. Remove that. Give us nothing but the clothes on our backs. Emily continued, her tone professional and measured. Randomize spawn points. Your current system places subjects in a relatively safe zone for the first hour. Eliminate that grace period. Drop us directly into high-threat areas. Thomas added his own suggestion. Permanent injury mechanics. Right now, the simulation heals minor damage over time. Make injuries persist. If we break a bone, it stays broken unless we treat it ourselves. James finished the list. And dynamic threat escalation. Make the environment learn from our tactics and adapt. Increase difficulty based on our success. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Ambassador Krell accessed his datapad quickly, pulling up information on humanity. His clawed fingers moved rapidly across the screen. Director, their homeworld Terra is classified as Class 7. It is a modest planet, relatively safe by galactic standards. They clearly do not comprehend what they are requesting. James turned to face Krell directly. Ambassador, we understand perfectly. We're not asking out of ignorance. We're asking because your Class 15 doesn't adequately challenge us. A wave of laughter rippled through some sections of the assembly. Several delegates made gestures that their translators rendered as mockery. One species, the Quellan, known for their military prowess, chittered loudly in what was clearly amusement. Vaxilon saw an opportunity. These humans were young, arrogant, and needed to learn their place in the galactic hierarchy. Perhaps a harsh lesson now would prevent deaths later. Very well, Captain Mitchell. I will personally oversee the implementation of your modifications. My team will create exactly what you have requested. He turned to his assistant, a smaller member of his species. Prepare Simulation Chamber 4. Implement all modifications the humans have specified. Full documentation of the process. Within the hour, the word had spread throughout the station. Humans, a barely known species, had requested modifications to make an impossible test even more deadly. Betting pools opened in the station's recreational areas. The average prediction for human survival time was 73 minutes. The most optimistic estimate was 2 hours. Nobody gave them longer than that. In the preparation area, the 4 humans checked their equipment one final time. They had been provided with the standard gray simulation suits, nothing more. No weapons, no tools, no supplies. They would enter the simulation with only their bodies and minds. Emily stretched her arms above her head, rolling her shoulders. Well, this should be interesting. Robert opened a ration bar from his personal supplies, breaking it into 4 pieces and sharing it with his teammates. My money says we see volcanic activity first. Maybe acid rain. Thomas laughed quietly. I'm betting on the megafauna. Something big and toothy. James smiled, a rare expression from their usually serious captain. Reminds me of that survival course in Alaska. Remember that, Robert? How could I forget? -40 degrees, no shelter materials, had to dig into a snowbank. Robert shook his head. At least this simulation won't be that cold. Probably. Emily pulled up her datapad, reviewing the environmental data one last time. Actually, one of the spawn zones has sub-zero temperatures. But compared to Antarctica, it should be manageable. A technician approached them, her blue skin marked with nervous patterns. The simulation is ready. Please proceed to the pods. The 4 humans walked together down the corridor. Through the observation windows, they could see hundreds of delegates gathering to watch. Some held recording devices. Others made gestures that needed no translation. They expected failure. The simulation pods stood in a row, their metallic surfaces gleaming under harsh lights. Each pod would separately render the virtual environment directly into the subject's mind, creating an experience indistinguishable from reality. Pain would feel real. Exhaustion would feel real. Death, while not actual, would feel absolutely real. James paused before entering his pod, turning to his team. Standard protocols. Stay alive, stay smart, and if things get serious, fall back on training. See you on the other side, Captain, Emily said. They climbed into their respective pods. The doors sealed with a hydraulic hiss. In the control room, Vaxilon watched through the viewing screen, his compound eyes reflecting the glow of dozens of monitors. His fingers hovered over the activation controls. Begin nightmare mode, he commanded quietly. The system activated with a deep hum that vibrated through the entire chamber. The observation theater filled rapidly as word spread through the station. Delegates crowded around 4 massive view screens, each displaying a different human's perspective. The screens flickered to life, showing 4 distinct and equally hostile environments. Vaxilon stood at the central control panel, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. James materialized in a landscape of nightmares. The ground beneath his feet was cracked volcanic rock that radiated intense heat. In the distance, mountains spewed orange lava into a sky choked with ash. Rain began to fall, but it was not water. The droplets hissed and steamed where they hit the ground, eating small holes into the volcanic stone. Acid rain. James pulled off his shirt without hesitation, tearing it into strips. Within 3 minutes, he had fashioned a crude mask over his nose and mouth using the fabric and some fibrous plants growing in cracks. He tested the air through the filter, nodded to himself, and began moving. His eyes scanned the ground constantly, reading tracks in the ash. Something large had passed this way recently. Robert appeared in a dense jungle so thick that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. Enormous leaves dripped with moisture. Beautiful flowers bloomed everywhere, their colors vibrant and alluring. He approached one carefully, studying it without touching. The flower suddenly snapped shut like a mouth, revealing rows of thorn-like teeth inside. Carnivorous plants. Robert smiled slightly and moved deeper into the jungle. He found a vine, tested its strength, and began weaving it into a snare. Within minutes, he had set 3 traps around a game trail. Then he sat down and waited, perfectly still, becoming part of the forest. Emily spawned into a frozen wasteland where wind howled with such force that it nearly knocked her off her feet. The temperature display on the simulation's interface read -68 degrees. Snow pelted her exposed skin like tiny needles. She immediately began moving, knowing that standing still meant death. She found a depression in the ice and began digging with her bare hands, ignoring the pain. 20 minutes later, she had carved out a small cave in a snowbank. She lined the walls with packed snow, creating insulation. Then she ventured out briefly, returning with the body of a small rabbit-like creature she had caught. She skinned it efficiently, using its fur to wrap around her hands and feet. Thomas found himself knee-deep in murky water that smelled of rot and sulfur. The swamp stretched endlessly in all directions. Thick fog obscured visibility beyond 30 meters. Something rippled beneath the surface nearby, and Thomas moved quickly to shallower water. He spotted a cluster of hollow reeds growing from the muck. He cut several with a sharp stone, then found 2 large rocks. He placed one rock in the water, set the reeds upright around it, and placed the second rock on top, creating a crude filter. Water slowly dripped through, cleaner than what surrounded him. He tested it carefully, then took a small sip. Not perfect but drinkable. Next, he fashioned a spear from a straight branch and a sharp stone tied with plant fibers. In the observation theater, the first hour passed. Delegates who had been joking and laughing grew quiet. All 4 humans were alive. More than that, they were adapting. They should be panicking by now, muttered a Quellan military observer. The psychological stress alone should be overwhelming. But the humans showed no signs of panic. James had built a small shelter using flat volcanic rocks, creating a barrier against the acid rain. He had also constructed a simple rainwater collection system, allowing the acid to neutralize by filtering through layers of volcanic ash and sand. By hour 6, disbelief spread through the watching crowd. Robert's traps had caught 2 creatures, providing him with food and materials. He had attracted a wolf-sized predator to his camp by leaving out scraps of meat. Instead of fighting it, he fed it regularly. The creature now followed him, helping to hunt larger prey. Emily had created a food storage system by digging deep into the permafrost, using the natural cold as a freezer. She had caught and preserved enough meat to last for days. She had also crafted better clothing from animal hides, looking more like a native of the frozen zone than a desperate survivor. Thomas had constructed a raft from dead wood and vines. He used it to navigate the swamp, mapping safe paths through the dangerous waters. He had identified which plants were edible and which would kill him. His spear had claimed several fish-like creatures that provided protein. Hour 12 arrived. Ambassador Krell suddenly stood, his eyes wide. He accessed his datapad with urgent movements, pulling up files that most delegates did not have clearance to view. His face went pale and his clawed hands trembled. Director Vaxilon, Krell's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. We need to talk. Now. On the screens, James had built a fire using friction and dry materials. The firelight reflected off his face as he roasted meat over the flames. He looked comfortable. He looked like he was camping. Krell did not wait for permission. He strode to the central console and inserted his security credentials, overriding the main display. The view screens showing the humans flickered and were replaced by a single massive projection. The council chamber fell silent as they recognized what they were seeing, a planetary data file marked with red warning symbols. This is Terra, Krell announced, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. The human homeworld. What I am about to show you is classified information that was restricted pending further investigation. Vaxilon's mandibles clicked in confusion. Ambassador, we already know about Terra. It is a Class 7 world. Pleasant by most standards. That classification was based on an incomplete survey, Krell said sharply. He activated the full planetary data. Numbers and images flooded the screen. The initial survey team only examined one coastal region, a temperate zone with moderate conditions. They never investigated the rest of the planet. This is the complete data. The delegates leaned forward, reading the information with growing horror. Terra's temperature ranges were displayed in bright red text. -89 degrees Celsius in some regions, +57 degrees in others. Many species in the chamber could not survive in either extreme. Oxygen concentration, 21%, Krell continued. For most of us this is toxic. We would suffer oxygen poisoning within hours. Humans breathe this naturally. More data scrolled across the screen. Atmospheric pressure variations, seasonal storm systems, tectonic activity. Each piece of information painted a darker picture. Their world has megafauna that hunted them, Krell said, bringing up images from the human database. Creatures called bears that weighed over 600 kilograms with claws as long as daggers. Crocodiles with jaws that could snap bone. Sharks that prowled their oceans, some measuring over 6 meters in length. Humans were not the apex predator on their world. They had to become it. A video played showing something humans called a hurricane. Winds moving at speeds that would tear most structures apart. Another video showed a tsunami, a wall of water that destroyed everything in its path. Then earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tornadoes. Terra was a world in constant violent flux. They have diseases, Krell added. Microscopic organisms that evolved alongside them. Viruses, bacteria, parasites. Their immune systems are designed for constant warfare at a cellular level. Vaxilon stared at the data, his compound eyes unable to look away. What is the corrected classification? Terra ranges from Class 9 in the most habitable zones to Class 13 in the extreme regions, Krell said quietly. Some areas, like their ocean depths and volcanic zones, would qualify as Class 14 or even Class 15. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations. A delegate from the Harmon species, known for their mathematical precision, spoke up. That is impossible. No sapient species could evolve on a world rated above Class 10. The mortality rate would prevent civilization. Yet they did, Krell replied. And more than that, they thrived. Their history is filled with exploration of their own death world. They climbed mountains where the air is too thin to breathe just to see the view. They crossed oceans in primitive wooden vessels, facing storms that should have killed them. They explored frozen poles and burning deserts. Not for resources or territory but for curiosity. For challenge. On the secondary screens the simulation continued. Hour 24 had passed, and the simulation's automatic safety shutdown had activated. The system was designed to end after 20 hours maximum. No species had ever required it to run longer. But the humans were still going, and the system had to be manually overridden to continue. James had expanded his shelter into a proper camp with multiple chambers. He had mapped the patrol patterns of the local predators and avoided them efficiently. He had even started cultivating some of the native plants, testing which ones might be useful. Robert's wolf-like companion now hunted with him as a partner. They had taken down a creature 3 times Robert's size using coordinated tactics. Robert had processed the entire animal using every part. Meat for food, bones for tools, hide for better clothing. Emily had created a network of shelters across her zone. She moved between them, never staying in one place long enough to become predictable. She had mapped the migration patterns of local animals and positioned her camps along their routes. She had more food than she could eat. Thomas had built a series of platforms above the swamp water, connected by rope bridges. He lived above the danger now, safe from the aquatic predators. He had created a water purification system that produced clean drinking water continuously. He had even started fishing, using techniques that suggested he found the whole situation relaxing. Hour 48 arrived. Something impossible happened on the screens. James had created a pattern of smoke signals from his fire. In Emily's zone, she responded by arranging white stones and patterns on the dark ice. Robert left markers on trees using charred wood. Thomas built signal fires on his platforms. Despite being separated by hundreds of simulated kilometers, they were communicating. Vaxilon's voice was barely a whisper. "They are coordinating." An alarm suddenly blared from the control panel. Vaxilon looked at the warning message and made a decision that terrified him even as he made it. His fingers moved across the controls, activating commands that had never been used before. "Protocol Omega," he said. "Activate Extinction Protocol." His assistant turned to him in shock. "Director, that protocol was designed as a system test. It was never meant for actual subjects." "I need to know their limits," Vaxilon said, his mandibles set firm. "Activate it now." Red warning lights flooded all 4 simulation zones simultaneously. The ground began to shake with violent intensity. In James's volcanic zone, mountains that had been dormant suddenly erupted with massive explosions. Lava fountained hundreds of meters into the air. In Robert's jungle, the trees began to fall as the earth split open. Emily's frozen wasteland cracked apart, revealing deadly crevasses. Thomas's swamp started to drain into massive sinkholes that appeared without warning. But that was only the beginning. The sky in all 4 zones turned a sickly red color. A shadow fell across each environment as something massive blocked out the sun. In the observation theater, delegates watched in horror as asteroids began to fall from the simulated sky, impacting the ground with devastating force. Electromagnetic pulses rippled across all zones, and anything electronic would have been instantly destroyed. Then the final element of Protocol Omega activated. From deep within the simulation's code, something emerged. The amalgam. It was a creature designed by combining the worst features of every Deathworld predator in the galactic database. 12 meters tall, covered in armored plates, with 6 legs that moved with terrifying speed. Its mouth contained 3 rows of teeth, and its tail ended in a blade-like spike. It had thermal vision, motion detection, and hunting intelligence that rivaled most sapient species. The creature appeared at the center point between all 4 human positions. Its roar shook the simulated world, a sound that registered at frequencies designed to trigger primal fear in most species. James heard the roar. He was already moving, grabbing the supplies he had prepared. His voice came through on the makeshift communication system the humans had built using salvaged materials. "Everyone, this is it. Extinction Protocol. Rally Point Alpha. Move now." In the observation theater, delegates gasped. Rally Point Alpha. The humans had planned for this. They had expected an escalation. Robert abandoned his camp without hesitation, his wolf-like companion following. He moved through the collapsing jungle with practiced efficiency, heading toward the center point. Emily sealed her shelter and began traveling across the breaking ice, using techniques that seemed impossible. She jumped gaps that should have been too wide, moving with confidence born from experience. Thomas launched his raft and paddled hard toward the center, navigating around the forming whirlpools. They converged on the central meeting point within 30 minutes. All 4 humans arrived carrying supplies, weapons, and materials they had prepared. They did not waste time on greetings. James pointed to positions and they moved immediately into action. Thomas began constructing fortifications using the materials he had brought. Robert scouted the perimeter with his companion, identifying approach routes the creature might use. Emily studied the environmental hazards, calculating how they could be used as weapons. James coordinated everything, his commands clear and precise. The amalgam detected them within minutes. It charged toward their position with incredible speed, its 6 legs tearing up the ground. The earth shook with each step. "Contact," Robert called out. "Incoming from the east." The creature emerged from the smoke and chaos, and even through the simulation, its presence was terrifying. Most species would have frozen in fear. The humans went to work. They had prepared pit traps using Thomas's engineering skills, covering them with debris. The amalgam's front legs plunged through, causing it to stumble. Before it could recover, Robert and his companion attacked from the side, using spears to target the joints between armored plates. The creature roared and swiped at them with its massive claws, but they had already moved. Emily threw containers she had prepared, filled with volatile chemicals extracted from native plants. They exploded on contact with the creature's thermal sensors, creating bursts of extreme heat that confused its vision. James used the distraction to climb onto a nearby rock formation, gaining height advantage. The battle lasted 26 minutes. The amalgam was powerful and intelligent, but the humans were coordinated in ways the simulation had not predicted. They used every environmental hazard against it. They led it into lava flows, across unstable ground, through areas where falling asteroids were most concentrated. Robert took a hit. One of the creature's claws caught him across the shoulder, and his arm broke with an audible crack. In the observation theater, several delegates looked away, unable to watch. But Robert simply switched his spear to his other hand and continued fighting without making a sound. The final blow came from a combination attack. Thomas had rigged an explosive using materials he had collected, Emily had identified the creature's weak point behind its cranial armor, and Robert distracted it from the front while James climbed onto its back. James placed the explosive precisely and jumped clear just before it detonated. The amalgam fell. Its massive body crashed to the ground and dissolved into code, the simulation recognizing its defeat. Hour 96. 4 full days. James's voice came through the communication system to the control room. "Director Vaxilon, we are requesting extraction." Vaxilon activated his microphone with shaking hands. "You have failed the simulation?" There was a pause. Then James responded, and his tone was almost apologetic. "No, Director. We completed it. We're just bored now. There is nothing left to do." Another pause. "Also, we recommend you upgrade Terra's planetary classification in your database. And your Class 15 rating needs adjustment. It is too easy." The observation theater was completely silent. Then, slowly, one delegate began a gesture of respect common to their species. Another joined. Then another. Within moments, the entire assembly was showing signs of respect, amazement, and in some cases, fear. Emergency council sessions were held over the following days. Decisions were made quickly. Terra's classification was officially changed to Class 13, with regional variations up to Class 15. Humans were prohibited from taking standard survival certifications because they would automatically pass everything. A new position was created, human survival consultants. Other species began requesting human-led training courses. In the station's lounge, the 4 humans sat together, relaxing for the first time in days. Robert's arm was in a medical cast, but he seemed unbothered by it. Thomas was reviewing data on his pad. Emily was eating with obvious enjoyment. James stared out the window at the stars. "Think they would let us try hard mode next time?" Robert asked with a slight smile. Emily laughed. "That was hard mode, Robert." "Exactly," he replied. From the observation deck above, Vaxilon watched them through the window. His assistant stood beside him, equally silent. Finally, Vaxilon spoke quietly. "Send a priority message to all exploration fleets throughout the galaxy. If they encounter any world rated Class 13 or higher, they must check for human habitation first." His assistant made notes on a data pad. "What should the message say, Director?" Vaxilon's mandibles clicked slowly, a sound that conveyed deep thought among his people. "Tell them that if humans already live there, it means one thing. They call such places home." The assistant nodded and left to send the message. Vaxilon remained at the window, watching the humans laugh and share stories. They looked so fragile, so vulnerable without scales or natural armor. But he knew better now. They were not fragile. They were survivors. They were born from a world that tried to kill them every single day, and they had not just survived it. They had conquered it.